You can tell we got our panel here in the studio. Tim Faust, Ken Detweiler, two of our baseball pros here. And also on the phone lines to round this sumbitch out, original FDH Lounge dignitary Nate Noy, who was an original along with Tim here. Nate, good to have you on, my man. How are you tonight?
Doing all right, Rick. I'm just waiting for the greatest day of sports, Sunday. No, that's not me that was waiting for the Daytona 500. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a head fake to everybody on that one here. And Nate, it's good to have you on. I mentioned at the top of the show, too, this was going to be, I don't know if you would call it the Four Horsemen, the Four Aces, whatever the case may be for tonight here. Mike Petak was going to be joining us here. So I was going to be the J.J. Dillon of the group. I'll have to step in for Lex Luger being out here and associate myself with Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. I don't know which of you guys is which, but nevertheless, it's the Three Horsemen and J.J. Dillon, I guess, so to speak, here tonight. By the way, shout out to J.J. Dillon, big baseball fan and former lounge guest. Love to get him back on. Even if he is a Yankees fan, we love J.J. anyways. But I have to let everybody know here, too, on the that's viewing us here tonight. We're going to switch in a second here and do justice to Nate being on the phone lines here with the Chiron.
Oh.
But first of all, we have the one. Yeah, I don't know if you're looking at that right now, but Belfie came up with this one special here. We are going to reference in some way or another the People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive, since we have the doppelganger here in studio. But Mr. Faust, your thoughts on the Chiron?
I've been told that before. My wife has actually heard that reference, and she said, "Yeah, you look like him with about 40 pounds of extra weight." So I didn't take too kindly to that, but hey, it could be worse, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I shudder to think who anybody would say the doppelganger for any of the rest of us is. I was told one time for me, Ronnie Garvin. I'm like, wow. For a guy that looks like he's been in a million bar fights facially, I would hope he could do better than that. We'll do justice here at a certain point, since we have Nate on the phone lines, and since we have Nate's photo in the system here as well. It's nice to be able to break out these features here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Tim misses the days of mixed vegetable curry back at the College of Worcester.
Oh, I'd give anything to go back to those days. Man, the chocolate milk, the peanut butter crunch with the chocolate milk on top.
I had cereal so many nights you wouldn't believe it.
Oh, there he is. He's on.
Did you ever have Captain Crunch? I used to eat that in the dorms down in Athens all the time. That was always some good stuff. You guys actually, when we talk about the roots of the lounge, like even before the lounge or before the lounge, you guys, broadcasting together at Worcester back in the mid-'90s.
Monday night, it was Monday afternoon roundtable, wasn't it, Noy? It was like 4:30 in the afternoon?
Yeah.
We did, you and Mike?
You did play-by-play, and I did color for the football team, too, our senior.
That's right. Yeah, we were the whole sports department. I mean, that'll tell you the kind of shape of the WCWS sports department.
Yeah. I did play-by-play for women's basketball, Rick. That was a trip, too.
Oh, God. That would, yeah. Did you ever make any references to whether or not it looked like any of the women out there were shaving points?
Thankfully, the FCC was not listening.
One can only imagine what that would have been. Let's for the sake of continuity here, guys, as we start to look at this, and tonight I figured here our seventh inning slouch panel would take a look at the start of spring training, essentially where we've been since the end of last season. We did a number of conversations at the end of last season where we went. For the sake of continuity, previous segment, Tom McCarthy, Phillies TV broadcaster. Probably the biggest story of the winter, I think most people would agree, which way the domino ended up falling in the case of Cliff Lee. A lot of people had him going to the Yankees. That seemed to be a foregone conclusion to many. You had Texas kind of getting back in it at the 11th hour, and then for once, the mystery team does actually end up signing a guy. It ends up going down that way. Cliff Lee goes back to Philadelphia. Tim, we'll start with you. We talked about it in the previous segment with Tom here. I mean, that was basically the shocker. I'm struggling to think in my head what the precedent is. You had the closest I can think of over a prolonged period of time, probably the Orioles of the late 60s, early 70s. For a brief window there in the 90s, The Braves really didn't go 4 deep that much, but in the early days when Maddox was there, Maddox, Glavine, Smoltz, and then when Avery still had it, of course, that's when the Indians ended up winning the pennant in 95. It overlapped during that period. The only time the Braves were able to win it all, I think, is when they had those 4 guys going. I mean, that's a heck of a precedent for Philadelphia when you look at that right there. The Orioles won the World Championship going 4 deep, and so did the Braves the one time they were able to do it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The Braves, during my lifetime, that's the one. And if you remember, they added Maddox. They were already a good rotation. It was always Glavine and Smoltz and the one other guy, and then they added Maddox. So similar to the Cliff Lee situation, they already had the Oswalt, the Holiday, and the Hamels already a formidable rotation, and then they add the 4th guy. So similar situation as to what's going on with Cliff Lee.
Well, the funny thing is, and I'm probably the only guy on earth who can say this presently, I still play my La Russa 92 on Sega from time to time, so I can tell you from that, Pete Smith and Charlie Leibrandt back in the day, I mean, they weren't on the level of these other guys, but in 92, they had some pretty bitchin' numbers themselves. So it wasn't a thing where, and then, as you say, they get Maddox subsequently, and then it just goes to another level. I mean, Ken, you actually, I know, have a lot of knowledge about the Orioles teams of those times. You actually referenced, I think, when we were doing our World Series coverage, what was it, Andy Etchebarren, I think, was the last rookie catcher. Yeah, before Buster Posey last year, and that was the staff that he ended up handling when they were able to go as much as 4 deep back in the day. Based on your memories of the Oriole teams and seeing them playing, as much of a student of the game as you are, I know you must have seen them a whole bunch of times. How does this Phillies lineup stack up with them in your estimation?
The lineup itself?
Well, the front 4 in the rotation, that lineup of pitchers.
Front 4, I think, is even better than what they had, potentially. I mean, you have to play it out and everything. As a sidebar, I wanted to say, last time we were together, we were talking about Lee not wanting the ball in the one game. This fits his MO, in my opinion, perfectly. He doesn't have to be an ace there.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be the workhorse that says, hey, I want the ball.
Right.
And let's go, like a CC Sabathia kind of.
Wait a second. When did Cliff Lee not want the ball?
I think it was in the final game. They skipped his they asked him to pitch in the World Series.
Oh, because of the rest.
Yeah, and he wanted to rest. It was like a 3-day rest type thing, and he said no. And then,
right, it was the Tampa series, right?
Yeah, it was in the playoffs.
It was let's go game.
Okay,
and they sat him out.
I don't agree.
I
disagree.
Well, I'm just saying that's the way he strikes me. And, and now here, and
this guy,
there's nothing wrong or right about it.
There's not a guy that I'd want on the hill in the postseason, including Halladay, than Cliff Lee.
Really?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
we agree.
I want Cliff Lee.
We can agree to disagree.
Look at his number. Remember, that's what I remember the last time we talked about his post. I mean, his postseason walks to strikeouts, hits to innings pitched.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, I don't make this point to say that he's not a good pitcher. He's not a Cy Young pitcher. He's not a stud. I'm just saying maybe it's a throwback type of thing. There are workhorses out there that will say, listen, I'll go on 3 days rest if it helps us win a series. And Cliff Lee chose not to. And it ended up working for him.
Well, he wasn't down 2-1. He was up 2-1 in that series when he decided. I mean, I think if
I'm just saying,
the chips are done, I mean, he's not LeBron James going to Miami. And too many people made that reference.
It's not me.
Those two. No, I'm not saying you did, but I'm saying a lot of people made that analogy, and I'm like, it's not even close.
Well,
not even close.
The other thing, and I'm going to want to bring in Nate on this in a second because he and I have talked about this off air. But the other thing, Ken, because I've talked about this a number of times with Nate. To me, it's all about what your game is. Halladay is still a guy that can blow it past you.
Yep.
Cliff Lee will never be that guy.
No,
Cliff
he's a
Lee in his own
pitcher.
mind, I think you lose more effectiveness on 3 days rest if you're that guy. So the whole thing of giving your team the best chance to win, in my estimation, he's looking at it like, I don't give us the best chance to win if I'm Cliff Lee at 85%. I think that's how he looked at it.
Yeah, and that could be. We don't know what's going on inside his head or any of these guys' heads. But I'm just saying that here he can be one of the 4 aces.
Sure.
And that's ideal for any pitcher, I think.
Yeah.
Unless you have an ego the size of Wisconsin.
Oh, yeah.
But no, I just think that these guys are unmatched.
Somebody may make a run at, whoever's in the 4 spot may make a run at old fat Mickey Lolich, 30 wins. I mean, who's the 4 starter that's going to match up with them on a consistent basis?
And look who the 5th pitcher is for Philadelphia, Blanton. I mean, he'd be, a number 2 here in Cleveland?
One.
Yeah.
Maybe a 1.
Yeah, well, look where you're placing them, Ken.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, okay.
Yeah.
Well.
That's very convenient, actually.
I know.
And, Nate, again, you and I have talked about this off air as far as Cliff Lee, his mentality, and how he was going to go about it, how much rest he was going to require. But Ken makes an excellent point, in as much as, barring an injury, you go into the postseason with those 4 guys, you never have to sweat that. It's a thing where Charlie just throws out whoever the freshest guy is and doesn't even blink.
Yeah, I agree with that in some ways, but a lot of that is, to me, with this team, is the change of pace between the styles of the pitching. And right now, Roy Halladay, even though Lee's had the better numbers in the postseason, is probably the best pitcher in baseball, and one of the most dominating power pitchers in baseball. And how do teams adjust? You face Halladay next the one game, and you got to potentially face Cliff Lee the next with a different style. I mean, you try to establish a rhythm, which is almost impossible to establish against Halladay, and now your mentality and the type of pitching changes the next game when you've got to face Cliff Lee postseason or regular season. I think it's going to give a lot of teams a lot of problems, and that's why, right now the Phillies are an overwhelming favorite to win the National League. I mean, it's not even close how big of a favorite they are from the odds makers to be the National League champions. So.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense, too, because, again, I'm hearing a lot now about the young starters with the Giants and the innings that they accrued. That will kind of catch up to you sometimes the next years. And that's Ken, you're a guy that's done a lot of coaching as well as analysis over the years. So let me ask you about that. I mean, your thoughts on these guys. I mean, they're all still on their way up as far as reaching their peak at that developmental point in time. You lard on the extra innings that they had in October, and I realized that it was of necessity, and when the window's there, you do what you got to do. But there's a lot of people looking at maybe wondering about a hangover for this year, and I can't help but think they might be right.
Yeah, I don't know there's going to be a hangover. I'd rather have 4 young arms than I would 4 older arms.
Well, yeah, that's true.
Because of the wear and tear of what's going on there. How ironic, though, is this that the Phillies now have to worry about their aging lineup.
Yeah.
As opposed to now they got the pitchers now. It's always something in baseball.
Right.
Which is what, to me, I love the most. Mm-hmm. And when he talked about the Giants last year, they still have the stud pitchers, but now where are they going to find the offense again? It's like
their TV broadcaster, Tom McCarthy, said in the previous segment they may end up sending out Ben Francisco and his fungo bat out there to fill a spot in the outfield. I mean, good luck with that. I mean, as Indians fans, and I think we're familiar with that tale.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just kind of funny to see that they may have to resort to that till Dominic Brown comes along, and it's going to be very interesting to see.
And, more so than any other sport, when you have an overwhelming favorite, mm-hmm. it's the old adage, you got to play the games.
Yep.
I mean, you said it before.
Yep. Yeah.
And so that, as a fan, as not a fan of the Phillies, now I automatically root for, not because I don't like the Phillies, because they're a very likable team. Sure. I like... I really like Cliff Lee, having watched him here and that amazing year that he had a couple years back here. I like Halladay, like Charlie Manuel. So they're a likable team, but automatically I want it to be interesting. Mm-hmm. So I want the challengers to emerge. I'd love for Florida to challenge them in the NL East. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I'd love for Milwaukee or Chicago to emerge. Pujols in his walk year. And so I would love for all these challengers to emerge. And it just, but when you have, there's enough holes in that lineup, and there's enough aging going on in that lineup that you could see a worst case scenario where that team, could struggle. And I know Nathan's going to jump all over me for even saying that.
Oh, exactly. I want to ask him about that, but I'll tell you, the thing with Florida, one of their big problems, because their owner's a cheap bastard. They went from uppercase Ugla to lowercase Ugla at second base in the offseason here, so that's the problem with that. Nate, how big of a favorite exactly do you see the Phillies as being in the National League? I'm going to be Chalky McChalkerson here and say they're my pick them out of the National League. How big of a favorite are they in your mind? How prohibitive?
Well, let me put things in perspective from what the odds makers are saying here, Rick. There's of the 30 teams in Major League Baseball, 25 of them are 20-1 or worse to win a World Series. So only 5 teams are less than 20-1. The fifth favorite team to win the World Series is St. Louis at 16-1. The fourth favorite is San Francisco at 15-1. So there's only 3 teams in baseball with single-digit odds. The Yankees are 6-1, the Red Sox are 4-1, and the Phillies are a 2-1 favorite to win the World Series. I mean, and you and I have talked about that as well. Only a few teams each year have a chance to win a World Series. I'm just kind of curious if these guys think that Philly should be such an overwhelming favorite. You know, Rick or Tim might be surprised, but these pitchers are good, but that much better, more than twice the favorite of the second best team in baseball, and to have 25 teams at 20-1 or longer to win a World Series. I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In baseball, anything can happen.
Yep.
And if I'm saying, you know, the Phillies or anybody else, who am I going to put my money on? Yeah, I'm going to put my money on the Phillies. Mm. I really am. I mean, the Red Sox would be, you know, for me a distant second. But yeah, I'm putting my money on the Phillies. But I completely agree. I mean, you put it in perspective. At 2-1, not so much.
Oh, exactly. You know, and I got no problem rooting for the Phillies. I have since. It was before they won the World Series, but the year that they did, we really started with the Lounge. We started making a lot of connections with their organization and stuff. Everybody we've gotten to know is real class people, like you heard from Tom McCarthy tonight. So just from getting to meet the people, and when we had the Fanatic on the show and everything like that, I root for them. And it's a tremendous thing here. You've always got them to block the Yankees or the Red Sox, as may be the case. And maybe that ought to be the other thing that we hit before we take our top of the hour break. If we're going to look at that, I know Nate rattled off 2 teams in the American League here, but I mean, if you're talking about the Yankees, you got to be talking about basically just being a public team, doing it on reputation at this point, because it really is, you know, CC Hughes and pray for rain, to update that old, adage from back in the day with the Braves here. Because I don't know, it is refreshing to see that the Yankees are having to talk about, well, maybe we can get some guys to eat some innings. It sure is nice to hear that they're having to talk that way about their rotation. To me, I don't know if they're as big of a favorite in the American League as the Phillies are in the National League, but I'm going to say close. With what Philadelphia or with what Boston did in the offseason here, I do think they overpaid for Crawford. I do think they're going to come to regret the Gonzalez thing, just because had they not done that, and we'll talk about that in the next segment, they might have been players for Pujols next offseason had they not jumped the gun and committed to Adrian Gonzalez as they did. But you move Youkilis over to third, which is a huge net upgrade in the infield here, and on down the line, you know, Ortiz kind of came back pretty good last year. The combination of that lineup, the combination of the starting rotation, you look at it, Ken, I would expect Beckett to have a better year than he did last year. There's a lot of people that are putting John Lester already on that tippity top tier. I think he's still more of a 1A as far as elite ace pitchers in baseball, but with Buchholz and everybody else, that's a darn good rotation. The bullpen looks like it's going to be solid 8th and 9th inning, similar to the Yankees. So I don't see anybody in the American League that stacks up to the Red Sox right now, Ken. They reloaded the way they wanted to.
Yep, and just touching on the Phillies before we talk about the Red Sox, and I heard this just today, actually, from someone on ESPN. They're in the middle of a dynasty. They've been the best team the Phillies have in the major leagues, record-wise, in the last 5 years. And I was like, really? And Charlie Manuel, most winningest manager in Philly history. And I'm like, and we had to get rid of him? Why?
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I see Tim loading up over here.
No,
I wasn't a big fan. I was glad to see him go at the time. But
right place, right time for Charlie Manuel. Good for him.
Yep. But you know, this could be the end of the Phillies as far as age-wise. This could be the beginning of the end, because I don't know if they have any replacements unless the Tribe makes some more trades with them. The Red Sox is my favorite. They're my favorite.
And he gets
They're
the distinction
loaded.
too. I mean, next to Casey Stengel, Charlie Manuel's the greatest manager of all time who's likely to slip the word tallywhacker into a post-game press conference.
Yeah.
Nate, thoughts on Boston? And again, do you see them as being a big of a favorite in the American League as I do?
Well, again, if you go back to the odds, I'll put it in perspective for you, Rick. Again, this is out of what the Vegas is saying. First of all, Philly is a 5-6 favorite to win the National League. The second pick in the National League is 7.5 to 1, the Giants. So again, overwhelming favorite to win the National League. You have to lay money. You'll even get even money to say the Phillies are going to win the National League. In the American League, it's totally a 2-team race. Boston is 7-4, and the Yankees are 11-4. And it comes down to what Boston's put together. Clearly, it's a better rounded team. The pitching is deeper, and the offenses are comparable. But you got to realize, you get into Yankee Stadium, and the bats that they have, you just said, get Sabathia and Hughes and pray for rain. Well, if you're scoring 12 runs, you don't need a lot of rain, and that's the formula for the Yankees. With basically in all their games is just match the ball and put up big numbers, and if they could do that, they'll be the team to beat in the American League. It's going to be a two-horse race. The American League should be very competitive the entire way through. I certainly see a Yankees, Red Sox, ALCS again, and unfortunately, it's hard to imagine a situation where the Phillies aren't the team from the National League. I'll be rooting against them. Nothing against the Phillies, but I don't like overwhelming favorites. And a couple of those starters get hurt, and Howard plays offensively like he did in the NLCS last year, and they won't be there. So
Tim, you talk about the top teams in the American League by great team standards. That Yankees lineup isn't a great lineup. The only two-team race I see is between the Yankees and Tampa for the other spot. They're not on the Boston tier.
I completely agree. Yeah. Both of us shook our heads.
Yeah.
When you were talking to Noy about
Ridiculous.
the 12 runs. I mean, they've got a pedestrian. One of their outfielders is pedestrian.
Yeah.
In Gardner, he had a nice year last year.
Slappy.
But he's pedestrian.
And which Nick Swisher's going to show up?
Exactly.
And which Granderson's going to show up?
Swisher had a career year last year.
Yeah.
I'm more bullish on Granderson than I am on Swisher.
Yep.
Swisher's never put up the average numbers that he did last year, and then you're putting a catcher on the downside of his career and making him a full-time DH. I mean, not to mention the fact you've got Jeter now. As much as I've come around to Jeter, he just signed a new contract. He's 36, 37 years old.
Downside.
I think the guy's going to come to play, and I think you're going to get everything out of him that you can. But you're coming off a bad year. You just signed a new contract. Yeah. I'm now. That's offsetting. You got Teixeira's, the Rodriguez's, and the Canos.
A-Rod's older. A-Rod's never going to be what he was. Now, what he was one of the very best players in baseball.
Right.
And 80 to 85% is still great. But still, 80 to 85%.
Yeah. But you're right. A lot of things have to happen right for that Yankees offense. And then you're not even talking about the pitching.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, Mariano Rivera is not going to be Mariano Rivera forever. When's he going to start becoming human? And he's old enough where it's not out of the question that he could start becoming human this year.
Well, he's only got one pitch.
Right.
He's made a living on it.
No.
It's a Hall of Fame living. But you're right.
Come on.
But age catches up with you. The thing that I see as a difference maker over the Phillies, over the Reds, and the Yankees is, one, they've got a great pitching staff, which we've discussed already. But they've got an outstanding handler, a quarterback, which is your catcher.
Yeah.
The Yankees have Martin, who's coming back from hip surgery?
Yeah.
Catching, always in a squat. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
And then you got Posada, and then you got a couple unknowns, really.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Saltalamacchia. Who knows if he's going to revert back to where he can't? I don't think he will. Can't get the ball past the pitcher when he's trying to throw to second base.
Right.
But, those are huge question marks. Not only their talent, but how can they handle a pitching staff?
Well, those are very good questions, too.
How are they going to do? Even though, like we've all kind of agreed, the Yankees, like you said, Sabathia and Hughes and pray for rain, and the rest of the guys could pitch for the Indians, I guess. But
pretty much.
But I'm just saying Ruiz is a huge catcher for the Phillies.
You know what? All I can say, let's take it to break on this note here. As far as it goes with the Yankees, what I'm looking forward to seeing here, you talk about Rivera and what if he starts to hit the downside at a certain point. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the clubhouse the day that somebody walks up and taps him on the shoulder if Soriano's pitching well. Hey, Mariano, remember the first World Series in our run when you were setting up for Wetland? What do you say, Mariano?
Yeah.
What do you say? How's the eighth inning sound to you, big man? Yeah. Sure, that's going to go over well. All right, we're going to take our top of the hour break, come back on the other side, keep breaking down the stories of spring training. We got to hit this Pujols thing. We'll hit that thing real hard. The deadline is coming tomorrow, and I think we all can see where that one's going. We touched on it a little bit in the previous segment with Tom McCarthy, kind of comparing the situation to Jimmy Rollins. Mm-hmm. What happens when you have to start paying an older player, and when you're paying an older player who cannot possibly live up to the money? So we'll look at Pujols. That's one of the big stories of spring training. This whole deal with Albert Pujols, specifically we were talking to Tom McCarthy about any of the parallels with Jimmy Rollins. There was an excellent column that was written by recent FDH Lounge guest Tom Verducci of SI vis-a-vis older players and this whole deal with that ever since the PED testing has come to baseball. And again, the game's not completely clean right now, but he said, and he traced it out, there's been more predictability injected back into the game, no pun intended, I guess, but as far as the way that we used to see players and used to understand that you get to the late 30s, you're going to kind of fall off. You get to the 40s, the drop is steeper still. Barry Bonds and a couple other guys kind of warped these perceptions. I still remember, by the way, all of the credulous sports writers back at the time of, it's amazing. This man is a modern marvel of science. How is he doing this? How is he at age 38 better than he ever was? I still remember these dipstick columnists. The truth was right in front of him. The guy's hat size was 5 times bigger than the previous spring training.
And he's growing still.
Yeah, he's still growing.
Shoe size.
My goodness. The advances of technology. This new millennium is something to behold. These reporters just slay me, you know? But anyways, we've now got the predictability back, okay? The growth curve of one's career is back in most cases where we expect it to be. So we talked about it in the case of Jimmy Rollins. And Tom McCarthy seemed to think optimistically that he was going to be able to reach a rational settlement with the Phillies for the next couple of years, a short-term type of deal. This thing with Pujols, you're looking at this now, the consensus number that's getting thrown around is 10 years, $300 million. There is no earthly way Albert Pujols comes close to living up to that for, let's say, the last 4 years of that contract. I'll be generous and give him 6, even though if you want to look at it, in the last year or two, strikeouts have been going up ever so slightly. Still an elite player, still one of the top 5 in the game, but you could already start to look at the guy and say, is he what he was even in 2008? It's only... You know, it may not be perceptible to the naked eye, but that's how these things tend to go. He's getting out of that 27 to 32 wheelhouse that these guys are in. So, Tim, I'll ask you on something like this. It's one of these things where, for St. Louis, it may make sense in a perverse kind of a way because whoever is, this contract is going to be a lifetime achievement award. It's not going to be based rationally on his market value of the next 10 years and the number he's going to put up. At least if he signs with St. Louis, you can make the rationalization. Okay, you know what? He was worth a lot more to them back in the day. All right, we're paying for that World Series. We're paying for the great, playoff runs that this team had. You can't rationalize the contract in any other kind of a way. But the hilarious thing to me, if he goes to New York or Boston, which is probably remote because of the first baseman they have, but if he goes somewhere else, let's say the Cubbies, who are going to have Pena coming off the books, somebody else is going to be paying Albert Pujols because of the name and the Cardinal glory years. They don't even get the benefit of what he's already delivered, Tim. That would be very rich irony.
Well, yeah, and I think it's ridiculous to begin with to pay for the Lifetime Achievement Award, as you put it. Now, Albert Pujols, I'm a little bit, less critical. I mean, he's still, what, 31, 32?
Yeah.
Okay. So you still, I believe, and also as a first baseman.
Yeah.
Also as a non-pitcher.
Yeah.
So you have a bunch of things that are working in his favor. But what you do if you're the Cardinals, and I'm not sure if this is your question, but this is the question I'm going to answer.
Okay.
If you're the Cardinals, you look at what's your per year value, and you look at so if the number is 10 years, $300 million, you divide that $300 million by the number of years of serviceability, which I would agree that 5 to 7 years is reasonable. And if it's worth the $300 million over those 5 to 7 years, then you, if not, then you back it down and you pay him 10. If you want to pay him 10 years, or if you want to sign him to a 10-year contract, fine, but back that $300 million down to whatever you think is reasonable. And if not, you got to let him walk. I mean, as a business person, you got to do that. But you got to figure out what he is worth during that next 5 to 7 year period.
Yeah, and instead of going, because I was thinking about this, alternate ways of doing this. Instead of going a flat 30 across that, what if you came to him and like, look, we're going to start you at like 37 or whatever. You'll still get your 300, but we've got to make sure that in the years when, no offense, Albert, but even when you're 39, you ain't going to be no $30 million guy. That's the kind of thing where, would that kind of creative accounting make sense, Ken?
Yeah, I agree with both of you 1,000%. Because unless he's in the American League where it can be a DH or something like that, throw all your money in the first 5 years if that's the case, and then drop it off the cliff.
Yeah.
The other thing I would have to say is I compare this in a way because how they represent their team and their city and the franchise is Derek Jeter. Even Babe Ruth got let go.
Right.
Time takes over, as we all agree, and it's silly to even contemplate, like you said, Tim. 10 years, it's lunacy.
Yeah.
And so I would say let him go if that's the case, because you can get two very, very good players to take his place. Take the hit, publicity-wise, and move on. You've got a year now to figure this out if he doesn't sign.
I agree. And Nate, it's a situation here where there's a fair amount of irony to this. Albert Pujols ends up backing up the deadline a day because the man who is Mr. Cardinal in all actuality, Stan Musial, was getting the Presidential Medal of Honor today at the White House. So I guess Albert deduced that it would be a bad move to try to step on Musial's day in the sun here. But it's one of these things where particularly there's a lot of people, though, that are starting to draw that parallel, Nate, between the dignity of a Stan Musial and the way that he conducted himself and the way that this thing has already been playing out. So it seems to me, if the Cardinals are going to be looking to move on at some point, they may be having some fertile ground there, because I don't see a lot of fans necessarily pointing at them and saying, we want you to destroy everything for $300 million for the next 10 years and completely kill the payroll.
No, they've done a good job of flipping the pressure to Pujols in the terms of public perception. But as we were talking, you guys were talking here, the team that makes absolute sense to sink the $300 million into him next season, and there's no question it's the only team in all of baseball where this makes sense, where it actually might be the best move they ever made, is clearly the Chicago Cubs. Because the Cardinals and Cubs, that is the primary rival for those two teams, and for the Cubs to be able to stab the Cardinals and take their best player and put him on the Cubs and make the Cubs competitive and maybe enjoy 4 or 5 seasons of being the favorite in the Central and maybe seeing a World Series if you can get by those Phillies, that's a good deal for the Cubs, because you got to realize all the ways the Cubs make money. I mean, the Cubs have WGN, so they sell the rights to broadcast the games for below market value. They've got all this other money coming in that nobody else has. Even when the Cubs are horrible, they still average $25,000 a game. I mean, they can do it. And I think that, just that added stab in the back to the Cardinals and bringing a guy like Pujols, I think it makes sense for the Cubs to overpay for Pujols to get him on board and let them be the favorite in the 2012 season for the Central.
I'm going to play devil's advocate on that, Nate, because when you look at let's say the present contract of Soriano, there's a perfect example of a guy who no longer is worth the very rich contract that he's got. They've kind of been choked off by some of the other contracts in recent years. They eventually got out from underneath D. Lee, but he was a guy that probably wasn't completely justifying that. Aramis Ramirez, particularly the way that things went last year. So the Cubs have had some kind of brutal experiences in recent years here with contracts that have gone sour. One could even make the case to varying extents that Carlos Zambrano fits under that. And I guess, actually, the more I think about it, the less I have to qualify that statement. I don't care how he finished last year. The guy is making ace money and hasn't lived up to it. So the Cubs, after choking on some of these contracts in the last couple of years, after looking around baseball and seeing what can happen when you become top heavy with contracts, and the Cubs not necessarily having the deepest of farm systems at the moment to be able to augment and surround Albert Pujols in what remains of his prime, do you not think these are factors that are going to dissuade the Cubs when push comes to shove?
all those names you mentioned, Rick, to me, there's a distinction. None of those guys are Albert Pujols. None of those guys. He is. I've heard people in the last few weeks call him one of the best 5 baseball players of all time. I don't know if I'll go that far, but his lifetime batting average is, 331 lifetime, and it's only going to get better for the next 3 to 4 years. I mean, there's other guys. D. Lee, I love D. Lee, but he was no Albert Pujols, and Soriano was great, but he's no Albert Pujols. None of those guys are Albert Pujols, Rick. Albert Pujols is, I can't, you tell me who you'd argue would be the best player in baseball position-wise other than him. Now today, and for the next 5 years.
I think it probably you start to get to the end of that 5 years, and I got some guys. I'll even I know I'm a huge mark for the guy, but if we're talking about where 3, 4, 5 years from now, either of the guys in Colorado, Tulowitzki or Carlos Gonzalez, I think is going to be right there in that conversation. I think as he continues to get better, and it's been a slower curve than some might have thought, Evan Longoria. So we start getting to the end of that 5-year window, and I got more than a few guys that might potentially fit that. Here's my point, though, proportionately on the money, and I want to see if you guys agree with me on this also. Alfonso Soriano, here's a good point of comparison, because Nate's right, that at his best, it would be a poor man's Albert Pujols, if you look at where he was in his prime. Now he's not in his prime. Now he's a drag on the franchise here by being he's better than league average, maybe significantly better when healthy, but nowhere near the money that he's making at this point in time. Now look at Albert Pujols once he continues to fall, in the years here. So that's I know Nate's point of view on this. Tim, let me ask you about this. That's a thing where I understand that you're saying these guys aren't Albert Pujols. But an Albert Pujols at $30 million is more of a dirty bomb on the payroll than these guys could ever be.
Yeah. That's where I say there is a comparison between the Pujols situation and those guys, because Nate's exactly right. None of those guys are Albert Pujols, but none of those guys had the contract that Pujols is going to get.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, within light years of that. So you are, in a sense, comparing apples and apples. One thing that I want to ask, and I want to throw it out there, is number one, why is the perception out there that Albert Pujols is evil right now? I mean, you guys kind of alluded to it that like the Pujols is back in the car. All Albert Pujols says is I don't want to talk about this during the season, so let's talk about it now. And maybe maybe his contract demand of 10 years, $300 million. If okay, maybe that's outright. But he's negotiating. Right. Okay, so he's saying I'm negotiating this. And I'm saying, I don't want to talk about this during spring training. Here's my deadline. Let's do it, and then we're not going to talk about it. Right. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. And then number two, I want to get your guys' take on the fact of where he says, if we don't get this contract done, I ain't waiving my no trade. And so what if things happen with the Cardinals? It comes to be a circus. The Cardinals are a bunch of games back in July. Does this get to be an issue? Are the Cardinals going to want to move him? In July this year, I'm real interested because I don't recall anyone of this magnitude ever going to a season like this with so much uncertainty and having already said, I ain't waiving my no trade.
At least not in that sport. Huddle.
yeah. Right.
But anyways, no, I hear what you're saying. Look, I'll go first, and I don't find him evil. I find him disingenuous, just because he's always cultivated a certain persona. And now it's a thing, and I'm not saying I believe all the rumors, but there are rumors that his agent is running around, putting stuff out there, and we're expecting that the $300 million did not come out of thin air.
It's negotiating in the year 2011.
Okay,
I don't think that's I don't think that's completely out of the realm of reasonable.
Well, here's the only thing I have a problem with is that if you were to ask him about this, that he would say it's not necessarily all about the last dollar. It's becoming evident right now it's all about the last dollar. I find it disingenuous. I think he's, in terms of his persona and in terms of what's really going on behind the scenes, there's a disconnect that I find to be disingenuous. I say that as somebody who's always respected the guy, and I see the way the game is being played right now.
And I think that's fair, and I think we actually might be saying the same thing. I'm saying, like, the contract demand itself, let's set that aside for a second. But the I don't want to say ultimatum, but the deadline and all that kind of stuff, and the leaks and all that stuff, I don't have a problem with it. I just don't.
I hadn't heard about not waiving the no trade, but it does. Honestly, if I were the Cardinals,
that's what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
That's what makes it evil. The whole point of I won't be traded this season. What if you're 10 games back in the middle of the season, and now the Cardinals aren't going to get anything for you when they could trade you off to the Yankees or Red Sox or the Cubs and get some decent prospects or something? That's what makes him evil. This whole statement of you won't trade me no matter what. That's ridiculous.
Well, they'll get a draft pick, but Walt Jocketty don't live here anymore. So what are they going to do with it, Tim? You know what I mean? Draft picks don't necessarily get you anywhere. All we got to do is drive down to Ontario to find that to be the case here in town.
Hey.
Stop now.
I only got 6 minutes to defend my Indians.
Hope springs eternal now. Maybe I'm Pollyanna on this whole thing.
Okay.
But I think that the St. Louis is a baseball town, and the fans know what's going on. The ownership really doesn't have a whole lot of dark past. Where there's gossip, they're professional. Pujols, like you said, up till this point has been professional.
Right.
So my hope is that this thing, they live up to their word. If it happens and they're not going to trade him, and that's the end of it.
Right.
Unless the media brings it up. And another team that I was thinking of, Nate, while you were talking about the Red Sox and the Yankees being a possible future home for Pujols, what about the Angels? Is that a fit, do you think, or not?
Well, maybe before Vernon Wells. I mean, that contract right there, the acquisition.
What are they doing?
Well, yeah.
Panic move.
But, I mean, as far as first base, a DH, 10 years.
Could be. Well, you got Kendry Morales, too, though. So, it makes that's the thing. A lot of teams are already covered at that position.
But Pujols, I'm sorry. I was just going to say Pujols is a hell of a glove.
Oh, he is.
So he's got that going for him.
But see, so is Teixeira. So you're wasting, if you're the Yankees, you're really kind of wasting it. Am I right that the Red Sox may look back at this and kick themselves? Because if they just held out a little bit longer to see what was going to happen here, I know that maybe people didn't see things deteriorating this rapidly.
I don't think so.
Yeah, but I mean, Tim, because think about it. Who would you rather have?
Yeah, that's a good... That's a really good question.
Very good point. Yeah.
Well, when we go back to value and everything, the value that Gonzalez commands versus Pujols, versus where they are. I mean, Gonzalez's age is. He might actually be a little bit younger than Pujols.
He is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, left-handed batter at Fenway.
More of his prime than Pujols would have.
I don't know. Now, the fact that they did have to give up people. And the fact that everything is win now for the Red Sox. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know that I'm that much of that camp as you are, Rick, because they did have to give up a lot for him. But he's younger. They don't have this year with him, and then they have the uncertainty. I mean,
that's true.
They had they had Gonzalez. They went with Pujols. If they're banking on Pujols and waiting for him, they might not get him.
Well, let me ask you this, and Ken, I know, clearly, of the bunch, you have the most old school mentality and everything, so you're the perfect guy to put this question to, because we heard this when the Indians re-signed Hafner, which, I'll say it, I was in favor of it at the time. Who knew, okay? Who knew? Didn't know dude was...
Steroids.
Roid monkey, allegedly. But anyways, I was in favor of it. It blew up on him. What I wanted was, and I knew they were in trouble, when they signed Westbrook. I'm going, don't sign Westbrook. What are you doing? Because Sabathia and Hafner. Had you not re-signed Westbrook, maybe you got enough to make it happen with Sabathia. But anyways, the question at the time was, can you afford to pay this much to somebody who's primarily a DH?
No.
I don't necessarily have that kind of problem with it, but I don't know. From your mentality, what do you say?
I wish they could get rid of the DH. So I would never. I would never pay for a guy that's just only a DH.
So Albert Pujols at $300 million. It's especially galling to you if he's primarily a DH.
Not in his later years, because he'll still have value.
Okay.
He's not going to be the most overpaid singles hitter like Hafner is.
Okay.
I mean, Hafner, that's what he does. He's not going to have 15 home runs by June.
Right.
Maybe not even all year.
Yeah.
So, but I think Pujols will help him. Pujols has been relatively healthy.
Mm-hmm.
So you have no reason to doubt that that's not going to continue.
Yeah.
And the guy can just hit the crap out of the ball.
He can. He can.
So I don't see that going away as his skills in the field may deteriorate.
Nate,
So-
what are some more of your thoughts on Pujols as far as any other potential destinations?
This Gonzalez-Pujols debate, I think we have to wait and see how the season plays out. I mean, what if Gonzalez has a solid season and hits 3 home runs against the Yankees in the ALCS to take them to the series, while Pujols goes 0 for 16 against that Phillies staff? You're gonna have many people say we should have had Pujols over Gonzalez at that point. So, I think you got to wait and see how the season plays out before you on paper, Pujols is clearly the guy you'd rather have there, but
That's true.
You can't wait a year. You need a Gonzalez this year to be the team to beat in the East and in the American League.
That's true.
So.
I'm just looking to see who I can second guess an entire season in advance, and Boston just was the first one to come to mind. But all right, as we take a look around here, any other thoughts on this thing here while we're doing our spring training roundtable?
I want to know what these guys think about the Michael Young thing, and I saw today that the Marlins are interested, and they're willing to pay $6 to $7 million a year of his 3-year, $48 million he has left on his contract. So they want the Rangers to cop up $30 million to get rid of the guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't look at Jeffrey Loria to go pitching in anything more than beer money when he's the guy who just offloaded Dan Uggla in the offseason, which was completely asinine to do, much less to do it in the division. I want to go around here and see, before we wrap this sucker, any remaining moves that anybody thought were exceptional in the offseason. Again, we've established who we think the strong favorites in the other league are. I'll throw a couple of them out for starters here. It's under the radar, in a lot of ways here, but what Milwaukee did with both Greinke and Markham there, they've got, maybe the best front 3 in that division, and that says something when you're going up against St. Louis there, but it's going to make it really tough for Cincinnati to repeat with what Milwaukee did. It's going to be competitive in the top couple of rungs there. Who's going to emerge to take on the Giants if they do reseed a little bit this year? You got to think that as Kershaw continues to get a little bit stronger here, the Dodgers could be a factor. I'm not so sure I like their lineup as much. The Wells thing, it's horrible to do in the long term over the course of the 4 years. If you're just looking at it in terms of this year, the Angels made themselves stronger. A lot of people are holding up the A's with some of their offseason moves as a potential that they could be the Giants of this year. So those are some of the other things that have been kind of floating around on this. I'm going to go around. I'll start with you, Tim. Any of the other teams that made moves in the offseason that you think could be in the mix?
I think the Austin Kearns signing by the Indians was fantastic. Kidding.
I got a bobblehead of that guy, by the way.
Do you really?
Yeah. I went to it the weekend they were giving them out in Cincinnati back in like 2003.
Okay.
I think you mentioned the Greinke trade. I thought Kansas City did a phenomenal job.
Yeah.
I think that was a win-win for both teams, as much as any trade can be. Kansas City was smart to say, you know what, in Greinke's window where we're going to have him, our guys aren't going to be ready yet.
Right.
We're looking at 12/13 as the time, and that's when Greinke's gone. They got a good book of prospects back. So
they did.
so that was you mentioned the Milwaukee side of it. I'm in complete agreement with you. Win-win for Kansas City. The other one, same division, Garza to the Cubs. The Cubs gave up a lot for him.
Yeah.
But here's a guy who's still coming into his prime. He's still got a couple. I think he has 2 or 3 years left until free agency. Relatively low cost option for the Cubs to go 1-2 with Zambrano. I think that's going to be end up being an underrated move for the Cubs.
To me, though, Tampa is so deep. I mean,
exactly. That was excess.
They'll just put a cheap young guy in there who's going to give you 80%.
Well,
what he was
yeah,
gonna
I'm not saying it was a bad trade for Tampa.
No,
either.
I know what you mean.
I'm saying it was a good trade for the Cubs.
Right.
Another win-win because they got a good book of prospects back as well. But I think that might be a good match, Garza on the Cubs, and I'm hoping to.
How ironic is that? Because how rarely do both teams win? And what happened when they got Garza for Delmon Young. In the long run, both teams won.
That's right.
Very interesting.
That's right.
And it could happen twice with Matt Garza in trades. Kind of sets them apart a little bit. Ken, what do you think? What were some of the big other stories of the offseason here? Teams primed to make a move.
I'm not going to be on the positive side because I agree with both of you on what you said about the Garza deal and Greinke and watching the Brewers. And Tampa Bay is going to be fun to watch. Kansas City is definitely a team on the rise. Next 4 or 5 years, I think they're going to be right there. Maybe 2 to 3 years even. It's probably more like it. The thing that I just scratch my head and kind of laugh in a weird sort of way and is the Mets fiasco. The Dodgers, another prestige franchise that
big market team,
the crap that they're going through
that you can't count on anymore. You're thinking about but you think about Pujols destinations, Dodgers, Mets. Big markets, first base openings there would be, but with the financial mess that each one of them are in, you can't count. Those are two big market teams that are now off the board.
Exactly. No, you're right about that.
No, that's why I brought it up because I agree with what you were saying, guys were saying about the excitement of the play on the field, but this nonsense that's going on with those two franchises, and then to go back to Nate's point, how awkward is this going to be? This is going to be like an ex-wife coming to a family outing after your brother just remarried her. It's going to be a little odd for Young to come back to the Rangers. What's going to be said there? I mean, the sands in the hourglass are going quickly through here.
Exactly.
And they're going to have to face each other and play nice, perhaps. Where does he go? I mean,
I don't even know.
That's a storyline that, I mean, defensively, they've got guys, as been mentioned and printed and everything. Everywhere around the infield, they've got guys that are better than him defensively.
Right. Well, speaking of divorces, going back to the Dodgers for a second here, memo to Frank McCourt, okay?
Wait a minute.
A hitman would have been cheaper. Plus, Frank McCourt, I'm pretty sure that you're Roman Catholic, and I can tell you as a Roman Catholic, a hitman would have been more permissible in this instance. So, probably, if you had it to do over again, you probably would have dialed up La Cosa Nostra rather than let it get into the court system. But, you live and you learn. Nate, any of your thoughts here? Any of the other teams primed here?
The Reds locked up some of their pitchers over the offseason. They got them locked up. The NL Central is the most intriguing race in baseball.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, the Cardinals are the favorite, but look who we've talked about. The Cubs are better, the Brewers are better, the Cardinals are right there, and the Reds are just as good. So that's going to be, in my mind, the most exciting race in all baseball this year. With the other races, we may see some distance. We know the Red Sox and Yankees will go back and forth, but all the other divisions, they've got that prohibitive favorite, and I'm encouraged to see the excitement of the competitive season in the Central. So,
well, and I'll tell you what, too. I'm very, very, very bullish on the Brewers for this year, but, Greinke, Weeks, and most of all Fielder, I'll tell you what, I'm not sure this piece of paper can fit through their window. I mean, I like them for now, but boys, you better get it done. It's like when they traded for CC. I mean, I respect the nards involved in doing something like that, but it came back to bite them, and this might also, too. If you can hang on to these guys. Now, maybe what they're figuring is, you get Fielder off the books. Maybe this is a tactical move. Maybe they're figuring with some of the guys they're going to be going, they're going to look to have it be Yovani Gallardo and Greinke 1-2 in the rotation long term. I could see them going that way potentially and say we're going to build around our two aces and then the rest of the lineup will kind of rebuild there. Maybe that's the way they're looking to go, Tim.
No, I think they're looking at this year's window.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I mean they can rationalize that if as that's our fallback option, but they're looking at this year.
You know what? But again, though, and here's the thing: it's a very rare thing that this comes into play with athletes and with sports, and I didn't want to say this to make light of the situation because the social anxiety disorder is a rough thing, and Greinke's already beat it once. He knows he's not cut out for him. New York, Boston, Philly, etc., a.k.a. the places that can pay him the kind of money that would price him out of Milwaukee. And so,
you know what? I don't want to digress, but it's funny because social anxiety disorder aside, that's true. There's also other guys whose personality, Javier Vasquez, don't translate to New York.
Right.
So you have a guy that's failed in New York.
Yeah.
His success, failure in New York, success somewhere else, and then the Yankees are dumb enough to bring him back. Right. And he fails again.
After they learned.
So there's just, and you know what? I was wrong about A-Rod because I thought A-Rod's was not cut out for New York.
Right.
Also, after his failings at the beginning of his New York career, he's since kind of ironed those things out. But now, as we talked about before, he's on the downside of his career. Kenny Rogers in New York. I mean, there's so many guys you go through
Randy
history,
Johnson.
and it almost is like, you know, people aren't. They're not talking about it unless it's a social anxiety disorder, as Greinke has. Some guys just aren't going to work there.
Joey Votto had something happen. This was like 2 years back. I don't know exactly what that was.
Well, his father passed, and then he had. I think he had the. Did he have vertigo or something like that?
I don't know. And there were some unsavory rumors floating around at the time, but there's never been anything to substantiate any of that, so I'm not going to get into them. But it's a thing where, you know, these things do happen with certain players. By the way, Javier Whitson, this is as good a place to bring this full circle as any. Why would the Yankees bring him back after they learned after the first time he was there that Javier Vasquez was Spanish for Ed Whitson? Why would you bring him back after you already learned that? You know? You had the one opportunity there. So, guys, it was every bit the pleasure that I knew it would be. Nate, one of our original dignitaries, thank you so much for joining us on the lines here, my man. It felt like you were sitting here right with us.
Anytime, Rick. It was a great time. We'll have to do it again before the season, or definitely when the season gets rolling. So
we're going to reconvene. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Nate Noy, one of our original lounge dignitaries. And, fellas, pleasure having you guys in. I'm so glad you could be here in studio.
Thanks
Ken Detweiler, Tim Faust, longtime associates of the program here. And so great to get to break down a little bit of seventh inning slouch here with you guys, get this thing going for spring training.